Do I think that there is a rise in anti-intellectualism? No. I think that has more to do with like a rise in awareness. I would actually say that that's an indicator that there is a rise in intellectualism because you're able to spot the areas where they are not existent, right? But as someone who has been reading since I was 2 years old, and that has been a point of virtue signaling for most of my young adult life, um, most of you weren't reading. I was the person in school to where the teacher would look, see me reading a book, and then point to me in the middle of class, get everyone's attention and say, "You see her? Yeah, you need to be doing what she's doing. She is doing very, very well." Like, I was the person that parents, teachers would just bring out and show as an example of an exemplified young lady. Which, stop doing that. They bully you after. Let's say if I were to believe that there is a rise in anti-intellectualism, then I could only say that that is a natural response and a valid one to the current circumstances that they are under. We're not doing well as a society. I'm sure you've noticed. We live in a time where our rights and access to things are not just being stripped daily, but like hourly. Like every day, there is a slew of new things that we have to contend with. Not only do we have to contend with the slew of things being removed from us, we then also have to deal with the like rise in the cost of living. Someone that I follow, like, can't think of the name right now, but they did like a literal like picture side by side comparison of the amount of money that they were paying for things in the beginning of this year versus what they're paying now, and the large discrepancies between the two of those. In certain instances, she's using it less and still paying more for the things that cost half of what they cost now earlier this year, right? So people are in like a real financial situation, especially since apparently outside of New York City, if you're even like a couple days late for rent, they will send you letters of warning for eviction, which is dramatic to say the least. So yeah, for some people, it's not that deep. And they have a right to understand that it's not that deep because they got to make two bands by next week or else they're out of a house. So for them, it's like, I actually don't really care to read further into this thing that you're telling me to read further into because one, I'm worried about being evicted. Two, there's barely any food in the fridge, which we're gonna come back to later. And three, this is the one thing that has brought me joy within the last 8 hours of the day. So no, I'm not gonna read into it. I'm going to enjoy it mindlessly. Another case in point, like being smart and poor is not financially lucrative. I would actually argue that there is no benefit to being smart and poor. There's no social benefit, there's no financial benefit. The only thing you get is a sense of moral superiority. I said what I said. But yeah, there is no benefit to being smart and poor. Particularly if we're going to start talking about what it takes to fuel the body of someone who is smart and who does think constantly. But yeah, it takes a lot to fuel a body that is constantly always thinking. It's not, it is the least beneficial thing to do and to be if you do not have the financial means to prepare for it. So it's like, no, I'm not going to read further into this because my body requires more energy to process and to regulate itself if I think further into this thing. It is more expensive for me to be intellectual than it is for me to not be intellectual. To be an intellectual, there is a price of entry, number one. And number two, there is a price of sustainability. I have to be able to feed myself consistently and well if I want to be able to think or sustain a body that is always thinking. You burn more energy and you burn more fuel the more of your brain that you are using. So that's why I say that like it is a natural response to survival, because if you can't afford to feed yourself consistently, if all of your rights are being stripped away hourly, if you live in a food desert, if your ability to feed your family can only happen but so many times a month, if you constantly have to work 8 hours a day, you can barely afford to live in the place that you're living, right? Like there is no cost or benefit to feeding a mind that is not only bogged down with all of these other things, but is also taking in extra information. Like there is no cost benefit to that. There's only a cost negative. So yeah, it may be annoying. It may be a little frustrating when you have to engage with people who don't want to think more critically about things. But that is a smart choice on their part. If I don't have the ability to sustain that level of thinking, then of course I'm not going to engage in it, right? Which is also why I don't think the response to this rise of anti-intellectualism is to throw a book at somebody. That is the last thing that you want to do. Also, not for nothing, as someone who's been reading since she was 2 years old, I've never had books being thrown at me so much within like the last like half decade or so, which I actually don't find compelling. I don't find it compelling that within this time you've been able to disassociate so well, and think that reading is like a response or an accurate response to uh, or an accurate answer to the way that people are having to find to deal with the situation that's going on. I think if you're someone who believes and really takes the idea of like anti-intellectualism on the rise as a thing, like if you actually take that seriously, actual solution to the problem is just engaging in conversation with the person that you're you're talking to, right? Like if you actually want to combat this rise of anti-intellectualism that you think is happening, then just go and talk to people. Talking to a camera and berating people for not being able to read a book is the least effective solution to the problem. As much as I've read, as much as I have consumed intellectually, I've never learned so much than I have in the last 5 years of being alive, which is the period that I've done the least amount of reading in my entire life. I was the type of person that would read at least 50 to 60 books a year, maybe even more. I don't know. I didn't start counting until the whole Goodreads thing started happening, and YouTube, BookTube, because I was a part of that. Well, I wasn't a part of it, but like I observed it. Um, that was when I started counting. Prior to, I didn't count. I just read. And so I am someone who read like voraciously as a child, which I don't necessarily think is a good or bad thing. But I do think that there are more negative sides to reading all the time than people want to acknowledge. But anyways, yeah, I've never learned more than in the period that I've read the least. And that's because I have become a more active participant in my life, because I realized that reading was a form of disassociation. So that's the thing. Doom scrolling and reading are two sides of the same coin. It is a passive form of engagement, either way. Whether you choose to sit and read a book or whether you choose to sit on your phone and scroll through TikTok, Instagram, whatever your preferred medium is, it is still a form of passive engagement in life. And it is still also a form of disassociation. So yeah, I don't think there is a rise of anti-intellectualism. I think there is a rise of awareness because we have become more intellectual. Well, actually, I think we have become more academic, not necessarily intellectual, but that's a conversation for another day. But there's a rise in awareness, yes. But this has always been the case. As I mentioned earlier, I have been reading my entire life mostly, and none of you were reading then either. So it's just kind of strange. Not for nothing, most of you just started reading like 5 years ago when the pandemic forced you to sit down and do something other than like go to parties, which I don't got nothing against parties. I wish I'd been at the parties too. But like, yeah, most of you have just gotten here. So it's kind of strange to see this sort of rise of like fear in the population not being well read when this has been a thing. You weren't reading when I was a child either. So I don't understand this sort of like blight or this rise in fear of people not doing something that they haven't been doing for a very long time. The only difference is that you are doing it now. You are experiencing what I would call the know-it-all stage, which is a lot easier to go through when you're like 8 to 13. It's not so cute when you're a grown adult doing it in front of a camera and on the internet. But unfortunately, that those are the cards that you have been dealt with. I am thankful every single day that I did not have to deal with those cards and that I was able to grow and be a dumbass outside of social media. But yeah, I think that's what this is. You're just in your know-it-all stage. There is no rise of anti-intellectualism. People haven't been reading this whole time. You've just started, and that's okay. It's a great thing to read. But if you're someone who actually does really care about helping people expand their knowledge, then talk to them. I promise you, talking to them and allowing them to engage with you in your life and the way that you go about your deeds and just sort of conjoining your two worlds has more to do with intellectualism than reading a book.